Propositions 160 to 179 of The Elements of Theology, by Proclus, translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Proposition 160. Concerning intellect. Every divine intellect is uniform, or has the form of the One, and is perfect, and the first intellect subsists from itself and produces other intellects. For if it is a God, it is filled with divine unities, and is uniform. But if this be the case, it is also perfect, being full of divine goodness. And if this be admitted, it is likewise primarily intellect, as being united to the Gods. But being primarily intellect, it also gives an hypostasis to other intellects. For all secondary natures obtain their hyparxis from such as have a primary subsistence. Proposition 161. Everything which is truly being, and is suspended from the Gods, is divine and imparticipable. For since that which is truly being is the first of the natures that participate of the divine union, it likewise fills intellect from itself. For intellect is being, as replete with being, and is therefore a divine intelligible. And so far indeed as it is deified, it is divine. But as filling intellect, and being participated by it, it is intelligible. Intellect also is being on account of that which is primarily being. But that which is primarily being itself is separate from intellect, because intellect is posterior to being. But imparticipables subsist prior to things which are participated. Hence being, which subsists by itself and is imparticipable, is prior to the being which is conjoined with intellect. For it is intelligible, not as co-arranged with intellect, but as perfecting intellect in an exempt manner, because it imparts being to it, and fills it with truly existing essence. Proposition 162. Every multitude of unities which illuminates truly existing being is occult and intelligible. Occult indeed, as being conjoined with unity, but intelligible as participated by being. For all the Gods are denominated from the things which are suspended from them, because from these it is possible to know their different hypostases, which are of themselves unknown. For everything divine is of itself ineffable and unknown, as being connascent with the ineffable one. From the difference, however, of the participants, it happens that the peculiarities of divine natures become known. The unities, therefore, which illuminate truly existing being are intelligible, because being truly so called is a divine intelligible, and imparticipable, subsisting prior to intellect. For this would not be suspended from the first Gods, unless they also possessed a primary hypostasis, and a power perfective of other Gods, since, as participants are to each other, so likewise are the hyparxes of the things that are participated. Proposition 163. Every multitude of unities which is participated by imparticipable intellect is intellectual. For as intellect is to truly existing being, so are these unities to the intelligible unities. Since therefore the latter, which illuminate being, are intelligible, hence the former, which illuminate a divine and imparticipable intellect, are intellectual. Yet they are not intellectual in such a way as if they subsisted in intellect, but as causally existing prior to intellect and generating intellect. PROPOSITION CLXIV. Every multitude of unities which is participated by every imparticipable soul is supermundane. For because imparticipable soul is primarily above the world, the Gods also which are participated by it are supermundane, having the same analogy to the intellectual and intelligible Gods, which soul has to intellect, and intellect to truly existing being. As therefore every soul is suspended from intellect, and intellect is converted to the intelligible, thus also the supermundane are suspended from the intellectual in the same manner as the intellectual from the intelligible Gods. PROPOSITION CLXV. Every multitude of unities which is participated by a certain sensible body is mundane. For it illuminates the parts of the world through intellect and soul as media. For intellect is not present with any mundane body without soul, nor are deity and soul conjoined without a medium, since participations are through similars. Intellect itself also, according to its intelligible summit, participates of unity. These unities, therefore, are mundane, as giving completion to the whole world, and as deifying visible bodies. For each of these is divine, not on account of soul, for soul is not primarily a God, nor on account of intellect, for intellect is not the same with the One. But each of these visible bodies is animated indeed on account of soul, and moved of itself. But it possesses a perpetual sameness of subsistence, and is moved in the most excellent order on account of intellect. It is, however, divine on account of union. And if it possesses a providential power, it possesses it through this cause. PROPOSITION CLXVI. Every intellect is either imparticipable or participable. And if participable, it is either participated by supermundane or by mundane souls. For imparticipable intellect, having the first order, is the leader of every multitude of intellects. But of participable intellects, some illuminate supermundane and imparticipable soul, but others the mundane soul. For the mundane multitude is not immediately derived from the imparticipable, since progressions are through similars. But that which is separate from the world is more similar to the imparticipable than that which is divided about it. Nor has a supermundane multitude alone a subsistence, but there are also mundane intellects, since there is likewise a mundane multitude of Gods, and the world itself is animated, and at the same time intellectual. The participation also of the supermundane Gods by mundane souls is through mundane intellects as the media. PROPOSITION CLXVII. Every intellect intellectually perceives itself. But the first intellect indeed perceives itself alone. And in this intellect and the intelligible are one in number. But each of the subsequent intellects perceives itself, and the natures prior to itself. And the intelligible to each of these is partly that which it is, and partly that from which it is derived. For every intellect either intellectually perceives itself, or that which is above, or that which is posterior to itself. But if indeed it perceives that which is posterior to itself, it will through intellect be converted to that which is less excellent than itself, and thus will not know that to which it is converted, as not being in itself, but external to itself. But it will only know the image of this thing, as being generated in itself from it. For it knows that which it possesses, and the manner in which it is affected, but not that which it does not possess, and by which it is not affected. But if it perceives that which is above itself, if indeed this is accomplished through the knowledge of itself, it will at one and the same time both know itself and that superior nature. But if it knows that alone, it will be ignorant of itself, though it is intellect. In short, by knowing that which is prior to itself, it will know that it is a cause, and will also know the things of which it is the cause. For if it is ignorant of these, it will likewise be ignorant of that which is the cause of them, not knowing that which produces what it produces, by its very being, and what the things are which it does produce. Hence, by knowing the things of which it is the cause, it will also know itself, as deriving its subsistence from thence. By knowing, therefore, that which is prior to itself, it will likewise entirely know itself. Hence, if there is a certain intelligible intellect, this, by knowing itself, will also know the intelligible, being itself intelligible. But each of the intellects posterior to this will intellectually perceive the intelligible which is in itself, and at the same time that which is prior to itself. Hence, in intellect there is the intelligible, and in the intelligible, intellect. But one intellect is the same with the intelligible, and another is the same with the intelligible which is in itself, but is not the same with the intelligible prior to itself. For that which is simply intelligible is one thing, and the intelligible in that which intellectually perceives is another. PROPOSITION CLXVIII. Every intellect knows in energy that which it intellectually perceives, and it is not the peculiarity of one part of it to perceive, and of another to perceive that it perceives. For if it is intellect in energy, and perceives itself as not anything different from the object of intellectual perception, it will know itself and see itself. But seeing that which perceives intellectually, and knowing that which sees, it will know that it is intellect in energy. But knowing this, it will know that it perceives intellectually, and will not alone know the objects of its intellection. Hence it will at once both know the intelligible, and that it intellectually perceives it, and by intellection it will be intellectually perceived by itself. PROPOSITION CLXIX. Every intellect has its essence, power, and energy in eternity. For if it intellectually perceives itself, and intellect is the same with the intelligible, intelligence also is the same with intellect and the intelligible. For being the medium between that which intellectually perceives, and the object of intellectual perception, and these being the same, intelligence also will be the same with both. Moreover, that the essence of intellect is eternal is evident. For the whole of it subsists at once. And this being the case, intelligence also will be eternal, since it is the same with the essence of intellect. But if intellect is eternal, it will not be measured by time, neither according to its being, nor its energy. But these subsisting with invariable sameness, the power also of intellect will be eternal. PROPOSITION CLXX. Every intellect at once intellectually perceives all things. But imparticipable intellect indeed simply perceives all things, and each of the intellects posterior to it perceives all things according to one. For if every intellect establishes its essence in eternity, and together with its essence its energy, it will intellectually perceive all things at once. For to every thing which is not established in eternity, the successive objects of its perception subsist according to parts. For every thing which is successive is in time, the successive consisting of prior and posterior, but the whole of it not existing at once. If therefore all intellects similarly perceive all things, they will not differ from each other. For if they perceive all things similarly, they are similarly all things, since they are the very things which they intellectually perceive. But being similarly all things, one intellect will not be imparticipable, and another not. For their essences are the same things as the objects of their intellection, since the intellection of each is the same with the being of each, and each is both intellection and essence. It remains therefore, either that each intellect does not similarly perceive all things, but one thing or more than one, but not all things at once, or that it perceives all things according to one. To assert, however, that each intellect does not perceive all things, is to make intellect to be ignorant of some particular being. For if it suffers transition in its energy, and intellectually perceives, not at once, but according to prior and posterior, at the same time possessing an immoveable nature, it will be inferior to soul, which understands all things in being moved, or in a mutable energy, because intellect, on this hypothesis, will only understand one thing by its permanent energy. It will therefore understand all things according to one. For it either intellectually perceives all things, or one thing, or all things according to the one of intellection. For in all intellects indeed, there is always an intellectual perception of all things, yet so as to bound all things in one of all. Hence there is something predominant in intellection, and the objects of intellection, since all things are at once understood as one, through the domination of one, which characterizes all things with itself. PROPOSITION CLXXI. Every intellect is an impartible essence. For if it is without magnitude, incorporeal and immovable, it is impartible. For every thing which in any way whatever is partible, is either partible on account of magnitude, or multitude, or on account of energies which are borne along with the flux of time. But intellect is eternal according to all things, and is beyond bodies, and the multitude which is in it is united. It is therefore impartible. That intellect also is incorporeal is manifest from its conversion to itself. For no body is converted to itself. But that it is eternal the identity of its energy with its essence evinces. For this has been before demonstrated. And that the multitude in it is united is evident from the continuity of intellectual multitude with the divine unities. For these are the first multitude, but intellects are next to these. Hence, though every intellect is a multitude, yet it is an united multitude. For prior to that which is divided, that which is collected into profound union and is nearer to the one subsists. PROPOSITION CLXXII. Every intellect is proximately the producing cause of beings perpetual and immutable according to essence. For every thing which is produced by an immovable cause is immutable according to essence. But immovable intellect, being all things eternally, and abiding in eternity, produces by its very being that which it produces. If, however, it always is, and is invariably the same, it always produces, and after the same manner. Hence, it is not the cause of things which sometimes have existence, and at other times not, but it is the cause of things which always exist. PROPOSITION CLXXIII. Every intellect is intellectually both the things which are prior and posterior to itself. For it is those things which are posterior to itself according to cause, but those things which are prior to itself according to participation. Yet it is still intellect, and is allotted an intellectual essence. Hence it defines all things according to its essence, both such as are according to cause, and such as are according to participation. For every thing participates of more excellent beings in such a way as it is naturally adapted to participate, and not according to their subsistence. For otherwise they would be similarly participated by all things. Participations, therefore, are according to the peculiarity and power of the participants. Hence in intellect, the natures prior to it subsist intellectually. But intellect is likewise intellectually the things posterior to itself. For it does not consist of its effects, nor does it contain these, but the causes of these in itself. But intellect is by its very being the cause of all things, and the very being of it is intellectual. Hence it contains intellectually the causes of all things, so that every intellect possesses all things intellectually, both such as are prior, and such as are posterior to it. As therefore every intellect contains intelligibles intellectually, so likewise it contains sensibles intellectually. PROPOSITION CLXXIV. Every intellect gives subsistence to things posterior to itself by intellection, and its fabrication consists in intellection, and its intellection or intelligence in fabrication. For if intelligible and intellect are the same, the essence also of every intellect will be the same with the intellection in itself. But it produces that which it produces by essence, and produces according to the very being which it is. By intellection, therefore, it will produce the things which are produced. For in intellect, being and intellection are both of them one. For intellect is the same with every being which it contains. If, therefore, it makes by its very being, but its very being is intellection, it makes by intellection. Intelligence also, which is in energy, consists in intellection. But this is the same with the essence of intellect, and the essence of intellect consists in producing. For That which produces immoveably always possesses its very being in producing. The intelligence of intellect, therefore, consists in fabrication or production. PROPOSITION CLXXV. Every intellect is primarily participated by those natures which are intellectual, both according to essence and according to energy. For it is necessary that it should either be participated by these, or by other natures, which possess indeed an intellectual essence, but do not always energize intellectually. It is however impossible that it should be participated by the latter of these, for the energy of intellect is immoveable. And hence the natures by which it is participated always participate of intellectual energy, which always causes the participants of it to be intellectual. For that which possesses its energy in a certain part of time is unadapted to be conjoined with an eternal energy. But that which has perfection according to the whole of time, is the medium between every eternal energy, and that which is perfect in a certain time, as well in the mutations of energy as in essences. For progressions are never effected without a medium, but through kindred and similar natures, both according to hypostases and the perfections of energies. After a similar manner, therefore, every intellect is primarily participated by those beings that are able to perceive intellectually according to the whole of time, and who always energize intellectually, though their intellection is in time, and is not eternally in energy. Corollary. From this, therefore, it is evident that it is impossible for the soul, which sometimes perceives intellectually and sometimes does not, to participate proximately of intellect. PROPOSITION CLXXVI. All intellectual forms are in each other, and each is at the same time separate and distinct from the rest. For if every intellect is impartible, and the multitude which is in it is united through intellectual impartibility, all things in it will be in one, impartibles will be united to each other, and all intellectual forms will pervade through all. But if all intellectual forms subsist immaterially and incorporeally, they are unconfused with each other and separate, and each preserving its own purity, remains that which it is. The peculiar participation, however, of each participating in a separate manner, manifests the unconfused nature of intellectual forms. For unless the forms which are participated were distinguished separate from each other, the participants of each of them would not participate in a separate manner, but in the subordinate natures, i.e. in the participants, there would be in a much greater degree an indistinct confusion, these being according to their order of an inferior condition. For whence would there be a separation of these, if the natures which give subsistence to, and perfect them, were without distinction, and were confused together? But again, the impartible hypostasis and uniform essence of that which contains forms evinces their united nature. For things which have their hyparxes in the impartible and the uniform are impartibly in the same thing. For how can you divide the impartible and the one? Hence they have a simultaneous subsistence, and are in each other, each wholly pervading through the whole of each in a manner unaccompanied with interval. For that which comprehends them is not extended with interval, nor is one of them in this thing, but another elsewhere, as in that which has interval. But every thing is at once in the impartible and in one. so that all intellectual forms are in each other, and are in each other unitedly, and at the same time each is distinctly apart from each. Corollary. But if some one, in addition to these demonstrations, should require also examples, let him direct his attention to the theorems which exist in one soul. For all these are in the same essence, which is truly without magnitude, and are united to each other. For that which is without magnitude does not locally contain the things which are in it, but the natures which it contains are united and separated, impartibly and without interval. For the soul genuinely produces all things, and each apart from each, attracting nothing from the rest, which, unless they were always separated according to habit, would not be separated by the energy of the soul. PROPOSITION CLXXVII. Every intellect being a plenitude of forms, one indeed is comprehensive of more total, but another of more partial forms. And the superior intellects contain in a more total manner such things as those posterior to them contain more partially. But the inferior intellects contain more partially such things as those that are prior to them contain more totally. For the superior intellects employ greater powers, having more the form of the one than secondary intellects. But the inferior intellects, being more multiplied, diminish the powers which they contain. For things that are more allied to the one, being contracted in quantity, surpass the natures that are posterior to them. And on the contrary, things more remote from the one, as they are increased in quantity, are inferior to the natures that are nearer to the one. Hence, the superior intellects, being established according to a greater power, but being less in multitude, produce a greater number of effects according to power, through fewer things according to the quantity of forms. But the intellects posterior to them produce fewer effects through a greater number of things according to a defect of power. If therefore the former produce a greater number of effects through fewer things, the forms in them are more total; and if the latter produce fewer effects through a greater number of things, the forms in them are more partial. Corollary. Hence it happens that the natures which are generated from superior intellects according to one form, are produced in a divided manner from secondary intellects according to many ideas. And again, those natures which are produced by inferior intellects through many and distinct forms, are produced by superior intellects through fewer but more total forms. And that indeed which is a whole and common accedes supernally to all its participants; but that which is divided and peculiar accedes from secondary intellects. Hence, secondary intellects, by the more partial separation of peculiarities, accurately and subtly distinguish the formations of primary intellects. PROPOSITION CLXXVIII. Every intellectual form gives subsistence to eternal natures. For if every intellectual form is eternal and immoveable, it is essentially the cause of immutable and eternal hypostases, but not of such as are generated and corrupted. So that every thing which subsists according to an intellectual form, is an eternal intellectual nature. For if all forms produce things posterior to themselves by their very being, but their essence possesses an invariable sameness of subsistence, the things produced by them will also be invariably the same, and will be eternal. Hence neither the genera which subsist from a formal cause according to a certain time, nor corruptible natures, so far as they are corruptible, have a pre‐existent intellectual form. For they would be incorruptible and unbegotten, if they derived their hypostasis from intellectual forms. PROPOSITION CLXXIX. Every intellectual number is bounded. For if there is another multitude posterior to this, essentially inferior to it, and thus more remote from the one, but the intellectual number is nearer to the one, and if that which is nearer to the one is less according to quantity, but that which is more remote from it is more according to quantity; if this be the case, the intellectual number also will be less than every multitude posterior to it. Hence it is not infinite. The multitude of intellects therefore is bounded. For that which is less than a certain thing is not infinite, because the infinite, so far as infinite, is not less than any thing. End of Proposition CLXXIX.